Welcome to Innovator Insights, where we explore the minds shaping the future of tomorrow's leaders. In this episode, Scott sits down with Adam Bellow, CEO and co-founder of Breakout EDU, and pioneer in gamification and educational technology. If you're looking for practical innovation strategies and thought-provoking discussions, you won't want to miss this one.
Welcome to Innovator Insights podcast. I'm Scott Fisher. For today's episode, I'm pleased to have as a guest the CEO and co-founder of Breakout EDU, an EdTech leader, a keynote speaker, and author. Adam Bellow. Welcome, Adam. Glad you could join today.
Thanks so much, Scott. Awesome to be here. Excited.
That's great. I appreciate it, really. Why don't we start off by talking about yourself? What inspired you when you were young, or when you were, a young professional? What really pushed you forward?
Yeah, I mean, I think thinking back on myself as a learner, I think I was definitely what you would describe as a selective learner. I think I did really, really well on stuff that I was digging in on and super passionate about. And like many kids, I kind of was like, nah, I'll just get by on the stuff I don't like or want to do. And I think in some ways, thinking about myself now, middle-aged over here, some of that served me really well. And then some of it's like, oh, I wish I really dug in a little more on the stuff that,
Sure.
Now I'm like, oh, I need to hire someone to help me with that. But I grew up, I was the son of two teachers. And so always had respect for education and always knew how important it was, both the profession part of it as well as being a learner. And so that's kind of what drew me to that field at one point. I didn't think I was going to do that originally, but that's where I landed. But as a learner, that's I was super passionate about creating things and designing stuff. I was making like movies using my Amstrad 8086 and drawing out pixelated drawings and putting them together, filming them on my camcorder, and then showing them to my friends at school.
I'm showing my age by recognizing those terms. So there you go.
Yeah.
Well, that's great. So now, that's where you started, but how'd you get to where you are now? And one big question I have for you, how'd you land that closing keynote speech at ISTE? So we can take those one at a time if you want.
Sure. So I think that, thinking back on it, I think how I got to where I am now is a bit of hard work and a bit of really right timing, right place, and a lot of luck. I kind of started my career in earnest, like thinking back on where I am right now. I think kind of the origin story is really when I was a classroom teacher. Mm-hmm. I wound up learning that hey, if you wanted to be, I was an assistant English teacher. If you want to be the head English teacher, you got to get a master's degree. I was like, all right, well, I'll go do that. So while doing that, I was asked to teach the adjunct class that I was finishing. So I literally was finishing a course on education technology. They're like, hey, you seem to be really good at this. Why don't you teach this next semester? And I was like, okay, that sounds crazy, but all right. Yeah. So I was literally going to school and teaching in the same, I would sit next to someone in one class, and then in the next section, I would go and teach the class that they were in. So it was a little weird.
That's great.
Yeah, it was awesome. But it was technology for students with special needs. And so loved teaching that class. And because I was in that class, and because I just, as I mentioned before, when I was a little kid, I loved to create and make things and share things. I started making this little website on iWeb, which I called educator at the time. And this was literally finding all these different free web tools and sharing them with my students, but not realizing that it's the internet and things are shareable outside of your little class. What was intended for the 20 students that I had in my section 1 of whatever class wound up getting shared around the world. And so very slowly people started being like, oh, I use this site and I find things to share with my students. So that's kind of where my career in EdTech really started. And I worked on that site day and night for nearly a decade, kind of in between other jobs. I was a tech director and all these other things that I was doing with schools. But my passion was always sharing these tools and finding these tools and helping people use them in their classrooms, kind of becoming an expert or certainly, learning more about how this education technology intersects. And, you mentioned the ISTE keynote. I think that it's weird to think that was so many years ago now. I mean, I think it's 12 or 13 years ago that I did that. How I started there is I spoke at tons of conferences for free for a very, very, very long time. It was never an intention to be on the circuit and doing lots of big keynotes. It kind of became a goal after I was seeing people doing it and I started to enjoy it. But, it was never my main gig, which I'm very thankful for. I think that I have a lot of respect for many good friends that are doing that as their profession. And I think back on it, I like the fact that I was able to do it once in a while and keep that muscle strong. Like I went to film school, and I think people, when they looked at that keynote, they were like, oh yeah, there's a lot of visual building and stuff. And how I got it was I had been presenting for maybe 4 or 5 years, doing conferences like ISTE, NEC at the beginning, and then ISTE. And I had done a conference. I think the real origin story of how I presented like that, which I think is oftentimes a lot of people are like, oh, your presentations are unique. Kind of by accident, though. So I had gone to, Scott, I don't know if you remember, a conference called the 140 Conf.
No.
It was hosted by a guy named Jeff Pulver, who actually was the founder of Vonage, which is just an amazing thing. A great guy, lives on Long Island. He and Chris Lehman of Science Leadership Academy in Philadelphia teamed up to put on this event, the 140 Conference, and it was at the 92nd Street Y. And so I had put in to present, and these were 10-minute presentations. Right. And I didn't have more than 1 or 2 presentations at the time. So I said, well, I just did this one at ISTE the week before, and it was an hour-long presentation. I'm going to try to do that presentation in the 10 minutes. And so I had 140 slides or some crazy number. And I just condensed it into a 10-minute talk. So it was much faster and much, and then people were like, oh, that's a great style. You should keep doing that.
There you go.
And I did.
Okay.
And so that kind of became the origin story. Yeah, it was effective. I think people liked it. It was edutainment or whatever. And then I had gotten a call from the folks at ISTE, and I still to this day can't believe that they asked me to do that. I loved getting to do that. I worked extremely hard on that presentation, and yeah.
Oh, it shows. It shows for sure. Even going back and looking at it, it holds up even after years later. And for people who might be listening in and may not be familiar, a keynote speech at the ISTE conference is a really big deal. So, kudos to you. That was well done, and good for you for being able to do that so well. So,
well, thank you.
Moving forward, why don't you tell me about your new role that I'm reading about, but I haven't really dug into it myself. So you want to talk about that a little bit? Yeah,
for sure. So other startups along the way, I think it's important to kind of, we'll talk about a lot of these things, I'm sure through the course of the conversation, but founded a bunch of other EdTech companies along the way, went to work at the White House for a brief moment and as a presidential innovation fellow. And then came on to work with Breakout EDU, which is where I am now. Breakout is an educational gaming company. Our mantra is to unlock the love of learning. We've been doing this for just shy of 9 years now. As a company dedicated to gamification and really engaging students, but tying it to academic outcomes. So it started as a concept that was taking the escape room and bringing it to the classroom. And then we've kind of expanded a lot into, well, let's just, what's the magic there? It's really engagement, it's problem solving, it's critical thinking, it's teamwork. And then how do we make that something that we can try to put into all sorts of different parts of the classroom? So yeah, that's my role. I get to work with an awesome team and build that out.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I will tell you, I have in the last district I worked in, we did have that, and it was great. But the first thought that pops into my head when you put education and game together, like there had to be some resistance just in general to the idea that you could successfully provide a format or a forum for students to effectively use games for learning as opposed to just wasting time. So is that something you needed to overcome as we're talking about innovation here in this podcast? Obviously this was a very innovative idea that you were presenting to schools. So was that something, a bit of a barrier that you had to overcome, or was it just readily acceptable?
No, I think it's definitely a barrier. I think explaining it to people, especially in the beginning when it was solely a physical product, explaining that to people, it's like, hey, we have this box that has a bunch of padlocks on it and your kids have to open it. And they're like, well, how is that an academic activity? And it was easy to see and understand, but gamification, it's kind of, it gets misconstrued or easily, misunderstood with different things in the past. So for example, products like, I mean, you say gamification, depending on if you're our age, you'll think of Oregon Trail and Math Blaster and those types of, kill and drill type of things, or Carmen Sandiego or whatever.
Yeah.
If you are a teacher today, oftentimes there's a million different variants of like a quiz-based game where it's like a multiple guess or multiple choice. You're racing to be the first one to get the right answer type of thing. For us, I think that the difference was, first of all, when we first came out with it, an escape room was not something that everyone understood. I remember a lot of people were like, is that like a panic room? I'm like, no. So that in the beginning was what we were dealing with, is like educating them where the idea came from. And then I think anyone that saw it, or I would say 95+% of the people that saw it totally got it. But it's a very difficult thing to have to show someone your idea in order for them to understand it.
Yeah, no, I absolutely. But a lot of times the physical instance of it does make it more easy to understand and to comprehend. But I just know in general, the point I was getting at was, I think oftentimes sort of red flags go off immediately when people hear gaming and school. Like you can't have both. And of course you can. I mean, we understand the value. We understand of the value of reward and encouraging students to continue on and achieve more than they had previously. So there's some definite value in it. But I just thought when you mentioned it that you might have, it might have been a little bit of an uphill challenge for you to begin with. So I'm glad you've overcome that. Now taking, a look back at the innovation, whether it be the Breakout EDU or some of the other stuff you did, was there any specific person or a moment that really shaped that drive you had for innovation in general? I'm not talking specifically about like when you created the site using iWeb, but was there a moment of time where it just clicked in your mind that you were an innovator?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that I did not consider myself to be an innovator. I just looked at it as I'm doing a project that I find interesting. I think when it felt like I was doing something that was innovative is I started getting emails from people thanking me for work I was not doing for them. Right. And so I think that that's when it really clicked. And I think I've had this moment in a variety of different ways over the years, whether it be, after the ISTE speech or after other speeches, people ask like, how'd you do that? How'd you get there? How'd you do, like a question similar to what you asked, but they were asking it as advice for themselves. Again, I didn't think of it that way. Like I thought of it as like, I'm just going to do the best job I can to make this what I'm proud of, and do it as creatively and as dedicatedly as I can. But yeah, I think that there are moments like that where it's like, oh, wow, there's something unique to that. And I think on the flip side of it, I think that there's been moments where I realize how, I don't want to say not unique it is, but it's not something that is truly, quote unquote, special. The site I was building, this educator site, which was really my first foray, and I really poured a lot of time, and eventually it became like a branded thing and all that. Mm-hmm. Meeting people like Kathy Schrock, who is a dear friend, but was doing that 10 years before on her own site, right, in a very different way, in a different, but at the same point, realizing that like not every great idea is novel and innovative. It's just the approach that you take that might be a different step or something. So I really appreciate that what I was doing was somewhat novel, but at the same point, I could see the bones and I could see that there were other people that had created the kind of softened ground for those ideas to take root.
Yeah, and I think over the years, it's been very important for the EdTech space in general, for people to pay it forward, if you will, and take something somebody else has done, improve upon it, but then allow others to continue to do that and not prevent them from benefiting from your knowledge or a resource that you have. So I think that's always been, very important. And yeah, I'm just having a flashback. You mentioned the iWeb is what you used to create. And I had a quick story here, a horror story. I rolled out 700 new Mac computers to teachers with the idea that they'll create their own websites. And it was wonderful. And I showed them how to do it. And then Apple said, we're done with iWeb. Just overnight, and it was like, okay, I'm moving on, but that's how you evolve. At least they had the skill set to move on to something else. It wasn't so important, the product, but the product was great, but that was harsh. So now you talked a lot about this site. Is that what you would consider to be your first really significant EdTech innovation, or were there some others after that or before that you are also particularly proud of? I'm sure you're proud of all of them. I don't mean to say it like that.
No. I mean, and listen, I think, I don't think backwards often. So I'm happy to reflect on it for the moment, but I think that that's one of the keys to being not successful, but I think being able to let go of stuff that's in the past. So yeah, I definitely think EduTecher was kind of where I got my start. It's where people started to learn who I was. I did a lot of presenting at the time. It was, 10 web tools to whatever. And it was always like being able to pull from the resource bank that I was collecting every day. So that's where I started. And then I went off to build another venture called EduClipper, which was basically Pinterest for education. Was the idea is that, to your point about sharing, and I listened to the last podcast that you had with Eric Kurtz, and, he said it really well about keeping things private is not what teachers do. You share. Right. And that was very much the ethos that I've had. And in fact, the mantra of EduTecher was explore, share, and contribute. And then EduClipper basically took that and said, all right, well, what if everyone could share it to the site instead of just me? And so that was really my second real venture. We raised money, and I quit my job at the time and was doing that full time. And that was really kind of where my EdTech formal career, I guess, took off there. Right. Built out one of the first digital portfolio tools. It was an iPad-based tool called We Learned It. And then wound up doing a whole bunch of other EdTech things along the way. And then obviously with Breakout, I think that's kind of, each of those were stepping stones. I learned a lot, and I took things with me, and you also learn what not to do. I think that there's, unfortunately in EdTech, as you said, you pass things forward. I'm old enough now and been through enough cycles to see people's mistakes. And so I often am helping other, founders and other EdTech folks, giving them guidance and trying to help them with anything that I've picked up along the way.
Okay. Now, when you first introduced, you referred to it as Pinterest for education, and then you decided to open it up to the public. Were there any security concerns that you really had to take into consideration, or any, firewalls, if you will, or measures taken to make sure that there were no security issues, whether it be like physically accessing information that they shouldn't, or whether it just be inappropriate information? Did you have to take certain steps for that? I spent a lot of time building out filters for that. So there was a lot of reporting features. There was a lot of not just self-policing, but AI, like machine learning at the time, filtering for language, filtering from certain sites, filtering as much content as possibly could. And this was 2012, 2013. So there was a lot of pains taken to flag content, to report content, and moderate content as best we could. In terms of security overall, I think it was a different time. And so, the concerns around student sharing were more like no social media. And so basically it was becoming a social media proxy for learners to share and create digital portfolios. It was private between the student and the teacher, and then it could be opened up to the parent. And then obviously it could be opened up with certain other controls. So a lot of thinking around privacy. I will tell you as an aside, and now that years have gone by, I can tell the story. I was working on selling the company towards the end as I was transitioning off and doing other things. And there was an episode of Silicon Valley that came out. And so I don't know if you watched the show or, Sure.
So there was an episode where people were talking about data privacy. And it was, this episode, I remember the particulars, but basically it was the concerns around having all this information and having all these users' information. And so it actually slowed down the acquisition of that company. Wow. Because they were like very concerned, watching this HBO TV show at the time about, oh, well, gosh, that could happen here. So yeah, security is vitally important. I know that's something, certainly working with GAT, and we take it very seriously, both at Breakout and, I've learned my lesson in other ways along the road.
Yeah, it is. It's a cat and mouse game for sure, always trying to stay ahead. And the important part for me, as going back to my role in the district, was I didn't want to put up unnecessary roadblocks to prevent that would prevent teachers from moving forward with their technology use or their innovation, as it were. But that's a fine line, because you need to be secure. When you're talking about students in particular, and their personal data, of course, it's extremely important. But that's a tough balancing act to allow people to be creative without giving them unfettered access or the ability to, or the ability for others to gain access to information that they shouldn't. So that's always a challenge that that I had faced. So of course, securing things, and as you said, that was some years ago. At this point, the mechanisms for securing information have improved tremendously, but it's still paramount to everything that we do, in the EdTech space.
Yeah, absolutely.
Excuse me. So, obviously in your roles, and I'm saying roles plural because, you wear many hats, as we've talked about, you've done a lot of interesting things, and you touched on briefly the White House and your experience with that. Would you like to talk a little bit about that experience?
Sure. I mean, I can give a brief update on, or not update, but brief recap of that. I served as a presidential innovation fellow. It was this idea of bringing forth folks from private sector into the White House, and then working for the GSA, basically on a whole bunch of different projects. So I worked on things like this something called Hack the Pay Gap, which is about ensuring that women who were making 70% of what men were making at the time were more set up for equal pay. Worked on something, vote.gov, ensuring that people could register to vote through things like Facebook and other, if you've seen that pop up and say, are you registered to vote on Facebook? That's something that the Presidential Innovation Fellows worked on. Worked on the White House Maker Fair, worked on the Science Fair, worked on a week of making, other things to support those roles. I wasn't the key player there. The one thing I was working on that we didn't get to build, but it was super cool, was something called Reform. And it was my big pitch was that why shouldn't all government forms be as simple to track as the Domino's pizza tracker? And so exactly. You should be able to see where all of the things you send into the government, whether it be taxes, whether it be other things, but some of this stuff did wind up going into the IRS and other things. So yeah, it was a great role. I'm hoping that it does continue. I think they were just let go this week, but hopefully it will come back. We'll see.
Yeah. We're all, I think, taking a wait and see approach here, and we're cautiously optimistic, but we'll have to see. But yeah, I wish going back to the tracker itself, that would have been great. As a citizen to be able to see that information.
I've got all the mock-ups. I'm still ready. I spent months on that, like just tinkering on it and trying to get it to go, but one day.
well, hopefully that will work out for you and for us. But in that role, they obviously brought you in as an outside expert, if you will, and I'm assuming that the group that you were working with were similar. They were people that came from outside of the government. Based on your experience there, how can I put this? How necessary was that? In other words, is the group of people that are technically employed by the government not really technical in nature, even though they're overseeing a technical program, and that's why they needed to bring in outside experts like yourself? Or how does that work?
I think that the people had different skill sets. So there were people that were extremely technical. There were some folks that were literally the builders. There were some folks that were project managers. There were folks like myself that were, like conceptual folks and product people, and totally different backgrounds. I mean, some folks were running nonprofits. There was like head of engineering from Google. There was a rocket scientist, like an actual rocket scientist, and head guy from Tesla was there, and all these other things that, when you put those people in the same space and you ask them to solve problems, some of them were problems that were assigned, but a lot of the times it was problems that they had perceived. And so it's like, all right, like the thing with the forms that I was talking about was just, I think we can do this better. And I think that there is a lot of good that came out of that group. And I will tell you, it was one of the times where you look around the room and you feel kind of dumb based on everybody else that's there, because it's just one after the next. Not only what they accomplished or where they came from, but just their minds. I was just, every conversation was a head stretcher, and people that were genuinely. I mean, these people, some of them, not myself, but some of these people were leaving, 7-figure salaries to go work for the government to try to just make things better for society, which I found both inspiring, and also just working with them is just incredible.
Well, I think that's, the best approach. I think, if you can reach out to people in various sectors who have expertise and they're willing to come together and work as a group, that's clearly, the best approach, rather than people who may not be as experienced, sort of guessing what the best approach would be, where somebody else knows, they have boots on the ground, and they're familiar with the landscape, and no, this is how we should proceed. And it's probably a much more effective way to operate, and probably greater results as well, I would think.
Yeah. I mean, it was just one of those experiences where the timing worked out for me. I was kind of sunsetting one of the startups and then was looking for something else. And then, literally, I think within the same week, I had gotten the offer, and, being asked to serve is one of those things where
Sure.
it was like, all right, let's give it a go.
Okay. Now, just revisiting that, just because in my mind, it is very much related to innovation. I'm guessing that the collective would be considered innovators, right? All of the people that were in that room to some extent. Did you find that there are common either personality traits or any other traits that they had in common, regardless of the sector that they came from? Were there some commonalities amongst all the people that you think each of the innovators had?
It's a really good question. I think that the common thread, thinking back to that very unique group of people, because they were so different and they're from so many different backgrounds, I think drive is really the key thing there. I think that there were, when you want to be innovative, you have to let go of some of the ego and there's definitely a lot of I'm right and here's why and grandstanding, and I've been guilty of it myself. I know others are as well. You're passionate about it, so you want to explain. But I think that the one common thread is just so driven, and people that will do whatever it takes to get things done, and that passion. And that's a key skill. And I think that for all learners, kind of tying it back to, you asked me my origins when I was a learner and what it was like, and I think about my own kids, the thing I want for them is to be passionate. I know how important that is as a skill, as a tool to drive you being able to go through anything.
Well, with that in mind, if you had some newcomers to the field who were looking to be innovators, particularly with tech, we'll stick with the tech field. Sure. Any guidance you'd offer them, suggestions? I mean, you mentioned about having the need for a drive and being passionate about it, but beyond that, any specific suggestions or advice that you might offer them?
Yeah, I think that there's a couple of key things. I had gone back and listened to your previous conversation with Eric Kurtz. I know he said share everything, even if you're not ready. I fully agree with him, so I won't steal that answer, but I would echo that. I think that you also have to be able to kind of get a pulse check of what's necessary, because to be innovative, it's not enough to solve problems that don't exist. You have to work on stuff that matters for somebody. And so it could be solving your own problem, and that's an innovative solution for yourself. But I think if you want to get actual, buy-in and adoption, and find that, what they call product market fit, if you're thinking about a company, you need to check with people constantly and get feedback and put it out in a feedback loop. I think it has to do with sharing, but it also has to do with receiving, being able to take feedback and listen critically. And there are times, I think that's a double-edged sword. The other part of that is being able to know when you're right, because there are customers that write in and ask for things at Breakout, and the team, I work with an incredibly amazing team, and they'll bring it up and they're like, hey, we just got this email and so-and-so's asking for this feature. And as a team, you have to be strong enough to say that not every feature suggestion is going to work for the entire user base. It might work for that one person or that even 3% of the people. But if what you're trying to build on the roadmap is going to affect 90% of the people in a more powerful way, you have to be able to back burner that. At the same point, you can't be pigheaded enough to be like, this is what I'm building right now, so that doesn't make any sense. So it's really a balance there.
Yeah, but you have to be careful as a as a producer of, software, whatever it is, at some point you start writing customized versions of it for each
Correct.
individual customer. And that's just not
It's the
something
kiss
that
of
you
death.
you can't support that,
Correct.
as much as you're pleasing one end user, so to speak, you might be upsetting 10 others or more. So you
Correct.
definitely want to be careful about that. So let's talk about, moving forward and looking ahead. And, we all know AI is everything these days. So within that, or even outside of AI, I suppose, if you have some other thoughts, is there any, are there any specific tools or trends that you think are what's going to be driving innovation in the years to come, that we should be looking at now, or that everybody is looking at now?
Yeah. I mean, I think you said it. Everyone's looking at AI right now. I think it's getting firmly baked into every product. And there's a lot of products that are solely trying to come out with, an AI solution for things that both exist and things that sometimes don't exist. I have not seen as much feature creep and company competition as I'm seeing right now. So just like kind of my statement on the AI space is, there's a million companies that are looking to grab this little land grab of basically being their own version of ChatGPT for schools or whatever the OpenAI solution is for schools. At the same time, you're seeing every other consumer product, whether it's a microwave that will sense the food and tell you how to cook it, or on the education space, it's all the tools we use. It's our Gmail services and Google Classroom and all the Apple products, and everything we're using as a tool is baking in that AI as a feature, not as not as its own entity. And so that's a big thing, but I do see that continuing in terms of the trend of both consolidation. We fast forward 2 years from now, these companies that everyone's excited about right now, someone's going to gobble them up, whether it be a Pearson or McGraw-Hill or whatever, or they'll gobble themselves up. And the feature creep will slow, and that's that. So that's my kind of 2 cents. I've seen this story before. I know how it ends in that regard. But what I always like to say is you marry the ability and you date the tool. And I think that's kind of the really important thing here. AI is not going to go away. I don't think we turn the blind eye and pretend we can't use it and whatnot. On the other hand, I do think obviously all the concerns, or some of the concerns, not all the concerns, some of the concerns are extremely valid. About creation and what does it mean for learning. Learning will evolve the same way the calculator did not get rid of math, and all these other things have just incorporated this as a tool that allows us to do additional things and think about it differently. But I think that it comes back to creation, and what people can produce continues to get more incredible. And students, whether they're using AI as a starting launch pad, or whether it's a tool that they're using in addition to their skill that they bring to it and their idea that they bring to it, I think that that's not a bad thing. And I think that, in terms of innovation, it allows people to more quickly iterate on ideas and share things and bring things forward. And in classrooms, I think that's wonderful. There are specific tools that build presentations for kids. And as a former English teacher, I like to think about it all the time. Do I want them to worry about the content or the presentation? Is it the substance or the style? And if there's a tool that can handle style and allow them to just edit it, but you tell them that it's really the substance, that's great. On the other hand, you can flip that and say, hey, here's a Wikipedia page. Now turn it into the most concise piece. You have 5 slides, you have 5 minutes, whatever it is, to present the information, because that's important too. It's just a different skill set. And so, yeah, I think, I always say we live and teach in an amazing time. And I think that that's very, very true.
I agree. I'm interested to see lately, there's a bit of a backlash, and you sort of touched upon it nicely as you were talking, in that people are starting to go, well, wait a minute, we have these really powerful tools, ChatGPT, Gemini. Do we need all these other companies coming in, as you're saying, fighting for the land and charging a ridiculous amount of money? Or should we instead invest in learning to use those tools that are more readily available to everybody and save that money to train the teachers, who can then in turn train the students? Because my next question to you is, are we doing enough? And if you don't think we are, do you have any suggestions for what we should be doing differently to adequately prepare the teachers to in turn prepare the students to go out into the workforce that they're going to be facing over the next few years?
Yeah, I think that's that's an important question. There's a lot of parts to it. I think in terms of, you mentioned security and other things earlier in the conversation. I think AI brings up questions that are legitimate around security, also about ethics and about, creation.
Of course.
I don't think we're doing enough because I think that teachers are extremely overworked. I think that the culture and the climate of which, post COVID, but even before COVID, like teaching is not an easy profession on its best day. And I think we have not done a great job in many cases, not all, of allowing teachers to be professionals, to vet and find resources that are appropriate for their class and their needs. And even when we do that, I think that as a profession, we don't give teachers enough time to kind of vet those tools, use them, learn how to use them best. I think professional development is often sometimes an afterthought for a lot of products. And at the very best, it's, you're throwing 25 different things at teachers, plus giving them new initiatives and directives and standards and other metrics that they have to hit. It doesn't make sense. And by the time they get comfortable with something, you're on to the next. The school's switching to a different version, or the tool itself is gone, or whatever. So I think what we can do to best prepare the students for the future, and really the teachers for the current right now, is to bake in some extra time. I think that the study hall concept and prep period shouldn't be to prep for the thing you have to do 5 minutes from now. I do think that teachers deserve and need some mental space to say, hey, take one lesson that you do, or one thing that you do, or a unit, or whatever it is, depending on what you teach, and dedicate some time to researching how you could do it differently, better, explore some new ideas. And then as a collective, the teachers could share, like, hey, I found this great new tool for math that allows me to do X, Y, Z. Here's the project. Here's what the kids did. Because everything is just, this is, again, my ideal world of how education should work. But a lot of times it's run, and you don't get to look back and see how things were and how they could be better. And you also don't have enough time to prep to make things better in the future. That's kind of that's always been my slant on teaching and learning. And yes, the types of PD and the types of tools have evolved and changed, but that concept seems to be getting, we're cramming more and more into the day and not giving enough bandwidth for them to really inform their own opinions and adapt these new tools to prepare their kids the way that they should be.
Yeah, time is crucial to a teacher. You having been a former teacher, recognize that brief time when you don't have students, there's a lot of things you need to accomplish in that time, whether it's going to the office to make photocopies at the time, or whatever you need to take care of. So you don't get that prep that everybody goes, oh, well, you have this free time. Well, not really. You might be responding to a phone call or a million other things. So I think you're right. I'm not aware. And I've been in a number of districts that have handled it differently, some with greater success than others, but mostly with mixed results. I'm not aware of the best approach to PD that's out there yet. And I'm sure if I could find that, I'd be happy to share it with everybody. But I think that's something that everybody struggles with is how to do it. And I think it's dependent upon your environment, your culture. There's a number of factors going into your access to technology, all of those different things, but mostly time. And time is the most crucial. So that's always going to be the biggest challenge. But I think it's important that, you pointed it out, that we need to prepare the teachers. We need to give them the tools they need, the time they need, because ultimately they're the ones that are preparing the students. So that's the ultimate goal of what we're all about here.
Yeah, you said it really well. I think, just with my day-to-day job, like Breakout, we're selling this product. We have schools that come on board. We have, thank goodness, we have a wonderful PD program internally where we offer, hey, we have a live PD, an hour to get your teachers up and running, but that's an hour that they have to give. And, we know we're not the only tool that the teachers are using, but we're also we know we offer that. There are some schools that take it and they run with it and we wind up seeing great adoption and whatever. Then there's other schools that unfortunately they're like, oh, no, we're good. They tell the teachers it's available. Some use it, some don't even know. And then when you meet with them later, they're like, oh, we didn't even know it did that. It's like, right. because we didn't get a chance to tell you it. But we understand that it's not, again, it's that balance of time. And I think with PD, it's not just time to do it. I think it's time to reflect on it. And that's the part that I think is always overlooked completely. Because even if you say, all right, here's a new tool, play with it for 10 minutes and you'll put it in the lesson, you don't get to think about how did it work? How can I do it better? Do I come back to it and tweak it or anything like that? I think a lot of times it's like either it worked and it's great and you use it again, or no, on to the next. And I think sometimes a lot of those implementations could get just, get stronger if you gave it a little thought and got another chance to work on it.
Agree. But now circling back a little bit to what we were talking about a little bit earlier with the training that's needed, and I guess more or less with somebody who wants to be a tech innovator, okay, are there specific tools or tasks that you would encourage them to become more familiar with, whether it's by name brand or not? Is there something that you would say to them, if you want to be a leader in this space, if you want to be an innovator, and you want to solve the problem that we're talking about of helping teachers to help students, this would be Adam's suggestion or path that you go down to be an innovator?
Yeah, I think it's a hard question, because I think that, had we had this conversation 15 years ago, I would have said Twitter. That's where all teachers are collaborating and meeting and then sharing ideas, and you kind of build your networks that way. That's kind of dispersed a lot. I mean, Twitter is itself, X, whatever, like we won't go there. But I think that the, places like Blue Sky, even things like EdCamp that have kind of not been as popular in the last few years. I feel like those are the places that people that are like-minded find each other, and that innovative ideas get fostered, shared, and workshopped. There's a lot less of those. So I would say building community is still the number one thing. It's not a tool. It's a vital part of being able to get out there and share ideas with other people. So small conferences, events where you can kind of get outside the bubble of your school or district or company, where you can kind of cross-pollinate with others that are like-minded in the goals that they have, but not necessarily like-minded in the ways that they want to accomplish those goals. I think that there's you learn a lot from a little bit of friction, of people questioning, why your solution or the tool that you like is the best one. And so I do think that face-to-face conference environment is still very important for that type of experience. And then, online platforms, I would encourage all people that are being innovators to look around at what's going on. Because as I had mentioned before, I was building something, it wound up that it was a similar thing that was something that was built previously. That happens a lot. And I guarantee you that a lot of the AI companies right now, there's somebody building an AI company that's going to launch it and not realize that it's the same as the other 6 AI companies doing the same thing, because they're not doing that market research around them as to what actually is available in the space to solve a necessary problem. I think that's my tangential advice, is to look at solving a real problem.
Yeah. Well, that's key to everything. You mentioned you listened to the last episode, listened to the last few. That's something that I speak frequently about, that, I think solutions are only valuable, and whatever the solution is, doesn't matter if it solves a real problem, not just because it's pretty or, whatever. So I always think that's important, to make sure that whatever you're doing is solving a problem, or as you mentioned, sometimes it could be solving a problem they don't know they have, or solving a problem they do have. But either way, it's important that what you're doing provides a solution. So, all right, I have 2 more quick questions for you. I know we've run a little bit longer probably than you expected today, so I appreciate you.
No, you're good.
Staying with me here. Are there any projects or anything that you'd like to talk about that you have coming up moving forward?
Yeah, I mean, obviously working with Breakout EDU, we're building out a lot of new content. There's 2 things I'll plug real quick, I guess. One is Breakout Plus, which is our amazing point-and-click adventure games. We kind of took that idea of Sierra and Lucasfilm games that I used to play as a kid and loved, and we're like, hey, these are great, and we can just layer educational content in there and have an amazing experience. So we have new games that come out almost every month, which is super exciting. We were launching one this week, actually, Wizard of Oz style, which is going to be super fun. And then the other thing we've been working on, which is really exciting, is lesson content. And what that is we've taken our games that have all these critical thinking escape room style games, and then adding a lesson that is aligned to Common Core standards. We've actually started with math, just finished our 4th grade math curriculum. And by the end of the summer, we'll have an entire curriculum for 1st through 5th grade, which is just super exciting to be able to kind of have something that aligns to every single lesson and every unit of math in most schools, which is really cool.
Wow, that sounds great. I haven't seen the plus version, so to speak, but that sounds very exciting. I'd love to check that out. Is there a particular site or someplace that people can go to get more information or to connect with you or the people in your group?
Sure, yeah. Breakoutedu.com is the best place to get started. You can sign up. That we do 14-day free trials where you get access to everything. So you can check out Plus, you can check out all the content lock of the day, which is like a daily Wordle type of puzzle, but for critical thinking. So yeah, that would be the best place to get started. And me, I'm easy to reach. It's just adam@breakoutedu.com if anyone had any questions.
Well, that's great. We'll make sure that we put that information in the show notes as well. This is just an oddball question from me.
Yeah, sure.
That I'm going to throw out there. It's in regard to devices. I'm always curious to find out what their go-to devices are personally. So what type of phone do you have? What type of laptop do you use? So
sure. What
do you got there?
So I'm an Apple fanboy through and through. I think I've had every single version of the iPhone since inception. So I don't leave home without my iPhone 16 Pro Max, if people want to know, in the space gray, or whatever they call the black color now.
Gotcha.
So yeah, that's my phone. My MacBook Pro, I think I don't leave home without it, literally. And well, I'm talking to you through the Mac Studio, so really, like, all the Apple products is just the way we roll here. What was the third one? MacBook, phone.
No, you got it. Your phone, your computer, your laptop.
Apple stuff.
I'm just curious, you don't, I mean, it'll happen, of course, but you don't find someone saying, I have a Samsung phone and a Mac computer. I mean, it's all or none with most people, whether they're in or out with Apple. Do you have the Apple Watch on? Do you have all this kind of stuff?
I'm
just always curious. Right.
Yeah. I do have a PC. I'm in gaming and education and a big gamer. I do have a PC right next to me as well. If I'm not, it doesn't get turned on as often.
Okay. Now I have to ask one follow-up question.
Sure.
The stuff you're doing with Breakout EDU, will it work on Chromebooks?
It will, of course.
It's all web-based, right?
It's all web-based. It's all web-based. It works on any device. It'll work on iPads. We test it on every device to make sure that obviously students could use it everywhere. That was one of our big things with our digital products, just to make sure that it works on large displays like smart boards and those types of devices. It has to work. It has to work on everything because we don't want to be, we want to be device agnostic.
Gotcha. Okay, terrific. All right. Well, I greatly appreciate your time today.
Yeah, thanks, Scott.
It's been great having you on. I really enjoyed talking with you. So thank you very much.
Oh, my pleasure. It was great to connect. We'll talk soon.
All right. Take care.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
That's a wrap on this episode of Innovator Insights. A huge thanks to Adam Bellow for sharing his wisdom on innovation, gamification, and the future of education. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to visit our website, innovatorinsights.io. From there, you can find more episodes and subscribe to our mailing list to stay updated on the latest in technology and innovation. And if you found this discussion valuable, share it with a friend or colleague. Thanks for tuning in. See you next time.